Hey there, Fletcher from All Things Overlanding here, and today I wanted to address the topic of WeBoost versus Starlink. I get people in my comments all the time. I run a group called Newbie Overlanders that has about 26,000 people in it, and I can't tell you how many times a day I see people say, what should I get, Starlink or WeBoost? Or, hey, I'm thinking about getting a WeBoost, should I? And the overwhelming response has become, absolutely not, never get a WeBoost, you should always get a Starlink. So today, I'm going to walk you through the pros and cons of each, because I've had this for about a year, and I've had the WeBoost for about 4 years. I actually did a video on it 4 years ago that has about 100,000 views that I'll put a card to up here if you want to see all the specifics of the WeBoost and my impressions of it, as well as my test that I did of it. So again, I'm going to walk you through all that stuff today. I'm going to really actually address from facts and my experience and the uses of both the WeBoost and the Starlink over the last few years to tell you what I think makes the most sense and when you should have a WeBoost versus when you should have a Starlink, or maybe both if you can. I have both, and they both have their pros and cons. So again, I'm going to walk you through all that today and hopefully answer any questions you've got. If you've been considering possibly getting one or the other or both, this video is going to have everything you need to make that decision. So stay tuned to learn more about the WeBoost versus Starlink.
Understand where it came from, but you got it, I got it. It began in the land of the sandstorm. I fought it, though I wanted everything to do with what you give to me. Loosening my grip.
All right, guys, so as I mentioned in the intro, today I'm talking about WeBoost versus Starlink. They each have their own benefits and their own cons, right? So I'm going to walk you through the pros and cons of each of these things, and I'm going to talk about the use cases and when one makes more sense than another, because again, the normal answer that I see is never buy a WeBoost. No one should ever buy a WeBoost again. They are outdated. They are useless. And I disagree. I think that that is completely wrong, and I'm going to tell you why in this video. So let's start out with the pros of each unit. Now I'm going to start with the WeBoost. Again, I mentioned I'm going to put a card up here to a WeBoost video that I did before, where I literally had my phone out in the middle of Hoosier National Forest here in the Midwest, and I was, running a speed test on it. And then I turned on the WeBoost and I showed you a difference, and it was like 10, 20 times more signal than I had before I turned on the WeBoost. So it does make a difference. It does help you out. Now, stay tuned till the end, because at the very end, I'm going to give you my sort of breakdown of when I think it makes the most sense for WeBoost and when it makes the most sense for Starlink. But again, for now, I'm going to start and go through the pros of each, and then I'm going to go through the cons of each, and then I'm going to finish up with my final thoughts. So starting with the WeBoost, the pros, right? Right now, as you can see, I'm in a heavily wooded area. Now, again, as I mentioned, I'm in the Midwest. I'm in Indiana. I'm in Hoosier National Forest right now. And the Starlink can be pretty tough to get to sync up to the satellites. I don't have a clear view of the sky. So in this situation right now, I have pretty good cell signal. I can actually piggyback off of it and run a hotspot and even use my computer if I need to work. I have good enough signal, especially with the WeBoost, to where I can make my cell signal work, where the Starlink would be very, very difficult in this spot in particular to get to connect. And I'm not going to dive into cons of either of these yet, because we're going to get there, but we're just going to talk about pros for now. So the pro of the WeBoost is, if you have a spot that you go to quite a bit, which again, I'm in Indiana, there's just not a lot of good stuff around me unless you're going to drive 5 to 8 hours to go up to Wisconsin or Michigan or down to Kentucky. There's not a lot in Illinois. There's not a lot in Ohio. So Hoosier National Forest is kind of where I go most of the time. I probably take, 20, 30 trips a year out here. And so I'm pretty familiar with the area, and I know for a fact that I have sparse, if any, cell signal. But with the WeBoost, pretty much anywhere out here, I can at least get a text through. Now, am I going to be streaming shows and stuff? No. But will I get enough of a boost from the WeBoost to be able to get signal, to get messages through, to get my GPS to connect, to, send a text to my wife to tell her I'm okay and I'm at camp for the night? Yes. And that is the benefit of the WeBoost. Plus, another pro of the WeBoost is there's no setting it up. You just turn it on, it kicks on. You got to put your antenna up. If you have an adjustable bracket, like mine will go down so it's not sticking up all the time. I broke my old one on a fast food drive-through. So if you don't have your antenna set up, you set up your antenna, you turn it on, and that is the end of it. And when we get to the cons, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the Starlink looks like, because that is a con of the Starlink is you got to set it up, you got to get it out, you got to power it, you got to do all this different stuff, right? Now, of course, you have to power the WeBoost too, but it's a really small unit. I actually have mine wired in behind my back seat in the truck, and it's just permanently wired to my switcher, my Red Arc Red Vision system, so that when I get to camp, if I'm going through the woods, as my cell signal starts to drop, I literally hit a button up front, it turns it on, and it starts to operate, and I'm driving. I don't even have to stop or do anything. There's no calibration, there's no optimization, there's no setup, there's nothing that has to happen. You just flip a button and your WeBoost comes on and your signal gets better. Another benefit of the WeBoost is that it does work for multiple units. So it has a MIMO, multi-in, multi-out setup on it for the OTR version, which is what I have and what I'll link to in the description down below. That allows multiple inputs. I will tell you a story. Years ago, we went on a camp out and there were all these guys that the WeBoost was pretty new back then. And they're like, can I use it? Can I like pop into your truck? And I had my windows down, the front windows on my truck. And I had like two guys on each side leaning into the truck to suck signal off of the WeBoost, and all of them were like texting and dropping pictures on Instagram, and they were like, this is awesome, like I couldn't do anything 10 feet away, and now that I'm over by your truck, I have cell phone reception, right? I can send messages to my significant other, I can post a picture on Facebook. So while not amazing, and while it's not going to be 100 megabyte per second download speeds or anything, it will get you the signal to be able to do the bare minimum stuff, to communicate, to post updates, to drop things on social, to check those kind of things. So it is useful in those sort of situations. Now, another thing is the power draw is relatively low. So like my WeBoost is running right now and it's pulling about 1.2, 1.3 amps constant. So just FYI, it pulls very little power, whereas this pulls about 30 or so. 25 to 30 is pretty standard for me. So you're definitely going to have a lot higher power draw on the Starlink than you will on the WeBoost. So power consumption is really nice on this thing. I generally, when I flip it on, when I'm going into the woods, I'll leave it on until I'm on the highway on the way back. And then I'll be like, oh yeah, I should probably shut that thing off. And I'll flip it back off. But power usage is really nice on these things, and just hardwiring them is really easy. Now, as far as cost goes, before I dive into the pros for the Starlink, they're actually about the same price. So the WeBoost is usually about $500-ish, maybe $520, $530. Just kind of depends on the time of year. Sometimes they'll go on sale for like $450, but they never really drop a ton. So if you buy this thing for between $450 and $500, that's a pretty good deal. On the Starlinks, I bought mine on a Black Friday sale a year ago, and I paid about $450 for it, but retail price on the Starlink Mini is about $600. So again, they're both kind of right in line with each other, which is why I think people ask this question a lot, where they're like, well, I don't want to spend $500 on two different things that have different uses, right? I want one. Again, at the end here, I'm going to tell you which one I think is best based on where you live and kind of what you do. But if you can't afford both, that's totally fine. This took me years, right? I've had this for like 4 or 5 years, and then finally I bit the bullet and I bought a Starlink, because I really, in the future, I want to be able to go out and like work, like do my job from the woods. If I have to go on a 2-week trip to Wyoming, for example, or Idaho or something, which I want to do like once a year at least, I want to have something like this where I could really get on and I could do, uploading videos and streaming stuff and working and doing my job full time, from the road. The Starlink is definitely something that can do that. Whereas the WeBoost is more of like an augmentative thing that's going to help you get signal to get stuff out, but it's not going to, you may not be able to work full time from the road just off the WeBoost. One last sort of benefit of the WeBoost is that there is no charge. Once you buy the unit, you don't have to pay anything. You don't have a subscription. There are no updates or anything like that. It is just, you plug and play. You plug it in, your phone connects, and it senses that boost, and it basically just does everything automatically, and there's no subscriptions to pay for. So while it is expensive, there's nothing to pay on an ongoing basis, whereas the Starlink has a subscription fee. So let's start on pros for the Starlink, right? So I got a Starlink Mini. That is the only way that I would go. There are multiple Starlinks. There's the old original one, and then there was like a second gen, and then there's the Mini. Highly, highly recommend the Mini one. I think it's cheaper, or, probably not now. Maybe the old ones are cheaper now, but they have a separate modem that is a whole separate thing. You got to plug both in. You've got to mess with all these cables and stuff. The Starlink Mini has everything built into this one unit, and I actually have this Peak Dew battery on here. I did a video on this. I'll put a card up here if you're interested. But this is an uninterrupted power supply that will run the Starlink Mini for 4 hours without even having to plug anything in. It's just always on there. And because it's plugged into the unit, you can also charge this while it's running, so you don't have to worry about power interruptions and stuff. So I love this little battery. It's awesome. But even with that on here, this is the entire unit, right? And then I've got a little mount on here, and I've got a tripod that I use so that I can easily angle it and sort of point it up at the sky and get it aligned. But so the pros of this thing are, this thing is real internet. This is not sucking, giving you a little bit better, a little bit of a boost to cell signal. This thing will actually do 100 to 200 megabytes per second down, and it is impressive. When you get this thing aligned and optimized and set up, you can have multiple devices on this. I can have a laptop hooked up directly to it, so it's not the same as piggybacking off of your phone's cell signal. It's just like having a router at your house where you could have your computer hooked up, you could have your phone hooked up, your kids' iPads could be connected to it. You connect to it just like you would a normal Wi-Fi router, and that's pretty cool. Other pros are, again, that this gives you an option that otherwise you wouldn't have, right? Like before Starlink, there just wasn't anything. You had cell reception, you had a WeBoost, and that was pretty much it. Now this thing gives you, like, you could literally be on a mountaintop in Wyoming and you could have 100 megabytes per second download speed where you could be doing work, you could be sending files, you could be, having Zoom calls with people and stuff. This thing gives you a ton of freedom in a pretty small, pretty inexpensive package to really do work and really do like your normal day-to-day activities, even if you're in the middle of nowhere. So now that we've kind of talked about pros, let's dive into cons of each, right? So we've kind of touched on them by giving the pros. It's obviously the opposite things are going to be the cons, but there are a few others. So let's start with the WeBoost. For the WeBoost, the con is obviously, again, you're not going to have huge, crazy numbers from a download and upload perspective. So, if you were getting like 0.1 or 0.5 megabytes down, you turn on the Starlink, maybe you get 3 to 5 megabytes down, right? But so again, you're not going to necessarily be streaming shows or, watching videos or uploading videos to the internet or anything like that. But you will have enough signal to send text messages through and things like that. But so that is a con, is that is not a full-fledged guarantee of anything. Another con of it is, and people point this out all the time online, is if you don't have any reception, this thing does nothing. So again, it's not a silver bullet. If you are in the middle of nowhere and you literally have no reception, there's nothing for this thing to boost. So it's not going to do anything. Whereas if you are in the middle of nowhere and you have your Starlink, as long as you can get a clear shot of the sky, then you can get connected to internet even on top of a mountain, right? So that is a con of this, is that you have to have some sort of a signal to boost the signal. Another con is obviously price, right? It's getting trickier nowadays to justify when you can spend $450 to $600 on a Starlink. It is getting trickier to justify $500 for a WeBoost. Again, here at the end, I'm going to dive into, though, when I think it makes sense and when I wouldn't mess with this, and vice versa. Other cons of it are that you kind of have to mount it. Right? You could do this with the Starlink, but the nice thing about the Starlink is I actually have a backpack that I keep it in, and then I just bring a power bank with me, or I have a house battery that I can plug it into, and I can really easily throw this thing in the house, bring it out, make it super portable. If we were going somewhere with my wife's car, we could take it there, whereas my WeBoost, my antenna's mounted, my actual unit's mounted behind the seat, and it's hardwired into my truck. Now, the only thing that I usually take on overlanding trips is my truck, so that makes sense, but the WeBoost is definitely less portable than the Starlink, so that is a downside of it as well. The other thing is this antenna, right? So again, I mentioned I literally just went and bought the WeBoost branded antenna mount that allows you to fold it down, and I'll show you that. So it actually has this little pull tab here, and then you can pull it and you can put this thing down. So because this thing is so big and so tall, I've broken it on things. I've smacked it on trees before, and I've actually, this is my second antenna because I've gone through a couple, which is what forced me to get the adjustable mount so that I could fold it down when it's not in use. But the parts for this thing are expensive. I think when I bought my replacement antenna, it was like $120, and I think the mount's like 60 or 80. So like I am probably now, honestly, about $700 into my WeBoost, which again is a lot of money, but that's over like 4 years, right? I've used this thing for 4 years, and I can't tell you how many trips down here. If I'm going 15, 20, 30 nights a year down here, and I'm using this thing every time I'm in here, it's pretty valuable. When you break it down by use, for me, it makes a ton of sense. But expense and cost of parts and stuff, the fact that they're all proprietary is a little annoying. I've tried to buy the cheaper mounts, but they're always junk. They just don't work as well. The WeBoost stuff is really well made, but they charge for it, right? They definitely charge you the money. So cons of the Starlink, and this is going to be probably the biggest detractor, in my opinion, of why the Starlink kind of sucks, at least where I live. Now, thinking back to a couple of years ago when I went to Wyoming, we were almost always out, wide open skies. And so in that situation, you could probably just put this in like a mount, like my sat gear mount that I've got, and mount this on top of your roof rack and leave that thing on there 24/7, right? You could hardwire it just like I do my WeBoost, and you could have this thing on there ready to click a button just like I do for the WeBoost and run it. But again, here in Indiana, I have trees everywhere. I never have a clear line of sight. I always have to adjust it and angle it and mess with it to get it to align. Another thing about these things is that they require updates very frequently. I don't know why, but it feels like, I mean, I will literally hook it up the night before. I'll turn on my service and I will hook this thing up the night before. And I will download all the updates and everything and get it taken care of. And I will go out the next morning and it requires another update. And when you're in the woods and you're not aligned and you maybe have, partial tree coverage, it's really hard to get those updates down. So I typically see, in my experience, in these heavily wooded areas where I'm using it, I'll see anywhere from like a half hour to an hour of just like download time, installing updates, trying to get it aligned. Sometimes I'll have to power it down and power it back up. I actually have had a lot of problems kind of getting this thing to align and quickly spin up. So if I'm coming out here to work, for instance, like if I come out here on a Friday or something and I want to work from the woods, I can count on a good 30 to 60 minutes of delay from the time that I get to the forest to when I can actually connect to the internet and start doing my stuff. Whereas again, the WeBoost is instantaneous if you've got signal. Okay, so outside of the sort of slow connection time, again, a lot of you folks out west are probably laughing and going, oh, it doesn't take long for me. I just turn it on and it just comes on. That's great. Here in the Midwest, we just have a ton of coverage, right? We just have trees everywhere. And unfortunately, we just don't have very many spots. If you want to get out dispersed, you're in a spot like this that's covered in tree cover, and it's very difficult to get the Starlink to connect. So not to mention that time and that delay, oftentimes it's kind of like I've mentioned with awnings. If you have an awning and it's really hard to set up, you're not going to use it. And if you don't use it, what's the point? Even if it's better, even if your awning is better than an old awning that you had, if it takes a ton of effort to set up and then you use it 1 out of 10 times because it's just such a hassle, you're not going to use it. And that's how I feel about the Starlink is I have it. I've had it for like a year. I've probably used it 5 times, right? And that's because it's such a pain to set up. It's such a pain to optimize. It takes so long to connect that instead of going to a spot that's really remote where I have to use the Starlink because I don't have any cell phone signal, I find a spot like this where I've got a little bit of cell phone signal and my WeBoost will augment it and I can get messages through and I can do what I need to do without having to set anything up or plug anything in or optimize or update anything. Another con of this is the subscription. So as I mentioned with the WeBoost, there's none, which is a pro. But in the case of the Starlink, now recently they added a new option, which is really cool, and I use it quite a bit, which is $10 a month for 10 gigs. That's what I would recommend for most of you, unless you are doing a ton of again, video uploads, heavy data type stuff. I've found that 10 gigs will let me stream shows all night for a couple nights and also do my work for 8 hours a day. No problems, right? So the 10 gigs works pretty well for me. You can also get for $50 a month, you can get 50 gigs. So there are different options there, but you have to turn that subscription on. You have to turn it off. You have to think about it. Like when I'm coming out here, if I wanted to use this today, I would have had to go and turn it on before I lost reception because otherwise I can't turn on my Starlink and get it running. Right? So you have to pay that subscription fee. You have to think ahead. You have to turn it on. It lasts for 30 days. Then you have to remember to turn it off. So that is a little bit of a negative of this. Now, again, with the $10 option, a lot of people just turn it on and leave it on, right? And then you've got it if you need it. Like in this situation, I'm out here. I could use this thing if I wanted to. Whereas right now it's basically a brick because I didn't turn it on before I left. Now, thanks to my WeBoost, I actually have good reception out here. I could go and turn it on if I wanted to. And then I could, stream shows or do whatever if I wanted to tonight with this. But that is a con of this is definitely you got to pay $10 to $50 a month to be able to run this thing and use it. And then you have a data cap and you have to mess with that and you have to kind of monitor it. And if you go over, they charge you per gig that you use over it. Not a huge deal, not a huge expense, but there is ongoing expense with it. I mean, again, using it 5 times in the last year that I've had it, probably twice I used it at the $50 limit. And then the other 3 times I used it at the $10 limit, but still, that's still $130 extra that I've paid for this thing on top of the original purchase price in the last year just to use it. So again, the $10 per month one definitely makes it better, but that is definitely a con is you're going to pay through the nose. If you left the $10 one on permanently, you're paying $120 a year forever just to have this thing as an option to use it. So keep that in mind. All right, so now kind of wrapping this thing up. Now I've kind of talked through pros and cons of both the Starlink and the WeBoost. I'm going to kind of give you my opinions for when I think one makes sense versus another. And you're probably going to parse this out because I've kind of been hinting at it as I've been going through. But WeBoost and when I think it makes sense. obviously, if you're in a heavily wooded area, if you go to a place a lot and you always have just almost a little bit of signal, but sometimes your text messages fail, but sometimes they go through, that's a perfect use case for the WeBoost, in my opinion. So that is my use case, right? That is the reason that I bought my WeBoost is because I was out here and my wife called me one night and I was camping and I just had enough reception that the call came through. She said the dog ate something she shouldn't have. I'm taking her to the emergency vet. This is like 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, no, just like, let's wait a day. Like, let's just see. I love my dog. Don't get me wrong. But I'm like, and she's like, or maybe the cat did. I don't know. I'm going to take both of them. And I'm like, this is going to cost us $5,000. And the call kept dropping. And I'm walking through the woods with my phone up, trying to get reception to call and like see what's going on, see how many thousands of dollars we're burning while I'm trapped in the woods. Right. And I couldn't get through. And it was super frustrating. And then that made me think, like, what if something happened to my kids? What if something happened to my mom? What if something happened and they just couldn't get through to me? That made me really think about the importance of being able to at least be connected somewhat. And that is something I can see people in the comments saying is like, well, you go to the woods to get disconnected. Sure, we all do. But it's nice to have the option, if you want to be able to communicate with the outside world, whether it's for safety concerns or if you have kids or pets or whatever, right? If you need to be able to get through, if something happened to me, if I cut my hand right now and I'm bleeding like crazy and I can't drive out of here and I can't connect with anybody, that's pretty dangerous. But at least being able to get a message through, like, here's my location. I can't drive. I've cut myself. Can you send someone? I've got some buddies I could contact. At least I have options. And the WeBoost does that for me in Hoosier National Forest, where I go a lot. So definitely if you have a heavily wooded place, that would be good. If you go a lot on shorter trips and you just need something that's just going to, help augment a little bit, like, it's tough for me to justify turning on $50 a month for 50 gigs if I'm going to go 2 nights out of the month. But so if you go a lot on shorter trips to an area like this, then just having the WeBoost will give you just enough that, like, it makes sense and you don't have to turn on any subscriptions or anything like that. So again, the WeBoost makes sense for heavily wooded areas, places where you have a little bit of signal, but it's spotty, right? The WeBoost makes a ton of sense, and not having to pay for those ongoing subscriptions, to me, that makes it a good option for people that are in situations like that. Now the Starlink, again, if you are out west, if you're somewhere with super open skies all the time and stuff, if you don't mind the subscription fee, if you are working full time, if you want to work from the road, if you're one of those that's like, say, a creative, a marketing person, somebody that can work remotely and travels a lot to expos or travels a lot to go camping and things like that, the Starlink's pretty invaluable for that, right? As long as you have that view of the sky, as long as you can get it set up and put out, then this thing is really cool. I'm not trying to poo-poo on the Starlink. It is awesome. And I see why people always say, just get a Starlink. I'm just saying this thing is a pain in the butt for me where I live most of the time, and I don't use it most of the time. In a year, I've used it 5 times. So, but the WeBoost I used every single time I come out here. So again, if you have open skies, if you are really working from the road, if you need those higher speeds, if you've got a bunch of kids and you want to be able to stream shows and like really have like a Wi-Fi router, the Starlink will do that and the WeBoost will not. All right, but so those are kind of my thoughts, right, on the Starlink versus WeBoost. I may turn this into a podcast episode, or it might just be a video on the channel. I'm not sure yet. But I wanted to address that because I feel like, man, every time I see anybody post a question about a WeBoost, they immediately get shut down. And everybody's like, are you stupid? Just get a Starlink. And again, the Starlink is great, don't get me wrong, but there are definitely pros and cons of both. So I hope that this video, this audio helped you kind of get your mind around what makes sense for Starlink and what makes sense for WeBoost. And hopefully that's helpful for you. Now, of course, I will put links in the description down below to the Starlink Mini. I'll put links to the Peak Do thing. I've also got a case that I use for this. I've got my sat gear mount. So I've got a ton of really cool Starlink paraphernalia that I've got now that I will link to down below just to make finding stuff as easy as possible. I'll also link to the WeBoost. I'll link to that antenna. So if you need a backup antenna or if you need that mount, I'll link to all that stuff down below to make finding it as easy as possible. As always, down below this video, if you're watching on YouTube, is a join button. That's just kind of a passive way to support the channel. It also gets you early access to the videos, the podcasts that I do, all that stuff on YouTube. If you want to be more involved with all things overlanding, there's also a link to my Patreon group, and anybody in the $5 or more paid section of that gets access to our 24/7 Discord, where we all kind of chat about our gear and our rigs. We'll tell jokes and drop memes and stuff. It's actually a lot of fun. We've got 25 of us in there now, and it's pretty active. Everybody talks all the time and shares their stuff, and we get together for trips. We're going once or twice a year in person, and we do a Zoom call every month just to hang out and sort of chat and see how everything's going for everybody. So if that sounds good, check out the Patreon. Also in the description below will be a link to my website where I've got funny overlanding camping themed patches and stickers. Things like don't burn your wiener and it's a hot dog, or F people, let's go overlanding. There's also all things overlanding stickers and patches. So if you're into that stuff to decorate your rig, definitely check that out. And then last but not least, there's a link to the Newbie Overlanders Facebook group. This is a totally free to join group. Awesome people. No bullying allowed, so it's a great place to be if you want to come and learn about overlanding, or if you're tired of the bullying in the big groups and you're looking for a place that's a little bit more community driven. We'd love to have you in the Newbie Overlanders group. So again, that will do it for Starlink versus WeBoost. Post up in the comments below. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.